I'm so excited this afternoon because we've got three great authors with us. Four if you count the moderator, Dennis. We got Don Helin, we got Wendy, we got Dick. I'm so excited to have you all here with us this week. This week, we're just here today. This is not going to go on all week. This is just today.
Okay.
And they're going to talk about their great books. And Dennis, you know Dennis. Dennis has been a moderator for us numerous times. Right. I just want to let you know that the event is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, which is MECH Books. So it's Mech Mystery Books for those who couldn't participate today. So we have that available. So if you have to leave or something, you can still get a look at it later. If you don't wish to have your face as part of the video, isn't that a pleasant way to say it? If you do not wish to have your face as part of the video, please turn your video off or place something over your camera. Please keep your mic muted for the duration of the event. When the time comes for questions and answers, please type your questions in the chat box for the authors to review. And we'll get to as many of them as we can. The event goes until 4 o'clock, unless everybody runs out of steam before then. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our master moderator, Dennis Royer.
Hey, thank you, Deb, and welcome everybody to Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop's Stalking Stuffer Stories event. And she already introduced the three great authors that we have for today. And we might as well just get started right off the bat. And we have an icebreaker question. And I guess I'll start with Wendy because it's always ladies first, right? So Wendy, you write a number of series. You write an Allison Campbell mystery series and a Greenhouse mystery series and a Percy Power crime series. Can you give us a brief overview of each of your series and what's your most current release? And tell us a little bit about it.
Sure thing. So hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I wasn't sure I was going to make it. We lost electricity, internet, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay. So yes, I write three series. I'll just give a really, really high level overview of each of them. So the Allison Campbell mystery series revolves around Allison Campbell, who is a dissertation shy of a PhD in psychology. She's an outsider with her own troubled past and goes on to become Philadelphia's premier image consultant and kind of uses that outsider's perspective to solve crimes on the Philadelphia main line. There's 4 books in that series. Then the Greenhouse mystery series, Sowing Malice, is my most recent book in that series. In that series, Megan Sawyer is an environmental attorney turned organic farmer, and she returned to Pennsylvania, which is in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and to take over the family farm and to help her aging grandmother, Mimi. And along the way encounters all sorts of issues in the small town of Winsome and ends up solving crimes there in Winsome. And then finally, I write the Delilah Percy Powers series, which has a group of women who are PIs. So Delilah herself is a former cowgirl from Wyoming who goes on, she's a law school dropout, a police academy dropout, and ends up becoming a PI. And with her is a former nun, kind of a homemaker extraordinaire, and a former stripper. And together, the 4 of them solve crimes. So A Dark Homage came out in 2019 with the pandemic. I get these dates mixed up. And the next one will be out either late next year or very early 2023. And then I write I just finished a standalone thriller, which more on that probably in the new year. So thank you.
Okay, Don, you're up next. Can you give us a brief overview of your Zac Kelly series and tell us about your most recent release called Missing?
Okay, I'm more than happy to do that. And I'd like to thank both Dennis and Debbie, longtime friends, for inviting me to participate. Zac Kelly's an Army colonel, and he works for the President's National Security Advisor. And he leads up a small team that helps the National Security Advisor take care of problems. And after 3 tours I spent in the Pentagon, almost 10 years, I can share with you there are problems and lots of bureaucracy. And basically, there's a range of different stories where Zac gets into all kinds of trouble. They go from, the first one was in Gettysburg, tied into ghosts and stuff, and then on to Ireland. Then one from my tour in Vietnam, a couple in New York City. And then the one a lot of people have been enjoying is Roof of the World. That Elaine and I took a trip to Tibet, Bhutan and Nepal. And I've sent Zac there, and he really follows the steps that we followed, except that he gets shot at all the time. So that's kind of the subtle difference there. My latest is entitled Missing. And I usually use 2 plot lines because that way you get your reader going down the road and then you switch on them real quick. But I tried with Missing to put in 4 plot lines just to see if I could figure out how to do that. The first one is fairly routine until you start thinking about it. You know, we've all gone back to our high school reunion. Have people changed? You know, what are they like? How about that old girlfriend? You know, is she still, what's she look like and what's she doing? And so Zac, after 20 years, because he's been on the road a lot, he goes back to Minneapolis to his high school reunion and actually gets into a little more trouble than you think he might. The second plot line is one that, of course, Missing came out in 2020. And you'd have to be living in a cave to not be thinking about presidential election in 2020. And so elections, as a lot of people know, are coordinated at the state rather than at the federal level. And I began to think, you know, thriller writers always think in terms of what if. And I thought, what if somebody hacked into this system and messed with them, you know? The third plot line, Elaine and I recently moved to an over 55 community, and they have a wonderful memory unit here. And I have to share with you, some of my friends have memory challenges. And I thought they do a wonderful job here. But again, what if you had a bunch of people in these homes and they were picked on, kidnapped, and mistreated? And so that's in there. And the fourth one, I really enjoyed. I didn't know much about, but I went to work on an artificial intelligence. I thought, well, maybe somebody might use artificial intelligence to cook the book a little bit. And I learned basically that artificial intelligence is kind of like machine learning, where the computer, you give the computer problems and that computer uses pros and cons to try to figure out how to. I think a lot of people compare it to teaching a child how to use a computer rather than simply programming that computer. So the whole blurb question for Zac is, did somebody use artificial intelligence to cook the books and swing the election? And of course, I can't tell you any more about it because you have to go by the book. But thank you for a couple of minutes to talk about it.
Oh, very good. And Dick, I guess you're next. You write a Claire Carlson mystery series and thrillers under the pen name Dana Perry. I'm wondering, can you give us a brief overview of your 2 series and tell us about your current releases?
Right. Well, I'll start with Claire Carlson because that's the one I write under my own name, R.G. Belsky. And Claire Carlson is a TV journalist in New York City who, you know, solves murders. And this is the current book out. It's called Beyond the Headlines, and it came out in May. It's the 4th book in the Claire Carlson series. There'll be a 5th in 2022. And Beyond the Headlines, you know, because it's about the media and about news, I mean, obviously draw on a lot of stuff that we're familiar with today. And in this case, it involves a woman who I describe as being a celebrity for no other reason than she's famous. And the obvious comparison would be like a Kim Kardashian. You know, why is she famous? She's famous because everybody knows her, not because she's a movie star music star or anything. And she marries a super rich billionaire, and we can all think of a number of those that we know in the news. And I'm not giving away any plot spoilers here, but very early on in the book, at the beginning of the book, the billionaire is murdered during a divorce battle with the celebrity woman, and that really sets the tone for Beyond the Headlines. My character Claire, at first, the celebrity is accused of murdering her husband and is arrested, and my character Claire is determined to prove she's innocent. And then as she keeps digging into it, she's not sure if she's innocent, and she starts going back and forth. And the bottom line is she decides, well, I have to get the real story. And it gets into a lot of, current event things like Me Too and things like that, about if a woman is abused in a marriage, or if she isn't, or in a relationship. It also gets into Vietnam. The keys to this story are like 50 years ago in some ways back in Vietnam. So it's not a book about Vietnam, but there are references to that. And, I think for people who don't know much about myself, I've lived in New York most of my life. I've worked in the New York City media most of my life. I was an editor at the New York Post, New York Daily News, NBC News. I was in Vietnam a long time ago, and I'm actually originally from Ohio. And my character, Claire Carlson, lives in New York City, works in the media, and actually in the books is originally from Ohio. So you can see I tend to write about what I know, which is one of the things people say to do. Or maybe I just, don't have a lot of imagination about it. But I certainly draw on a lot of my own experience. And I think the three elements in the Claire Carlson books, for anybody who hasn't read them, are number one, I like to tell, a story with twists, and, hopefully they're not going to know the ending till you get to the end, which is not that unusual, I guess, in a mystery. One thing that is unique, I think I'm able to provide a look inside the crazy world of New York City media, just because I've worked in it, and that's what Claire works in. But I think the most important part of the books is getting the character right, the Claire Carlson character. And ever since I started writing mysteries, I've tried to write the kind of characters that I like to read about, whether it be Kinsey Malone or Philip Marlowe or Spencer, or, all these kind of great, Harry Bosch, all the great characters. And Claire's not really like any of them, but I hope she's like them in that you want to kind of follow her and see where she goes. Anyway, that's kind of my goal when I'm writing the books. And to your other question, I have another series which I write under the pen name of Dana Perry. And it's a series of thrillers which are mostly online and in Audible from a publishing house in England called Bookager, which is part of Hachette here in America. And I have two books out from that currently this year came out. One is called Her Ocean Grave, and the other is called Silent Island. And they're set in a small town in Martha's Vineyard. So it's a little bit more of a Cabot Cove kind of thing, where you have a little small town, but everybody's getting murdered all the time. And in answer, everybody always asks me the question, well, why do you call Dana Perry as opposed to R.G. Belsky? Most decisions are made in the publishing world, and I would just like to say I've been writing books for a number of years, and I think I've had books published under 4 different names: Dick Belsky, which is the name I used in journalism, Richard Belsky, R.G. Belsky, and now also Dana Perry, which gets a little confusing. I mean, I've had people look me up online. They say, well, I looked up Dick Belsky, but you haven't written a book since 1993. I go, yeah, that was the last one as Dick Belsky, but R.G. Belsky was created after that. So, but the two current are R.G. Belsky and Dana Perry. Thank you.
Well, Dick, you touched on something, and that leads into our next question. We're told as writers, early on in our careers, the recommendation is to write what we know, because it comes across as more authentic, because we've lived what we're writing about. And all of you have managed to leverage your real life experiences in your main characters. For example, Wendy's Greenhouse Mystery, her character, Megan Sawyer, is a former attorney. And of course, Wendy's an attorney. And Don, you're a retired Army colonel, and your Colonel Zac Kelly is a colonel. And Dick, you're a New York City journalist, and your character, Claire, is a New York City journalist. So the question is, how does your own personal background and experience manifest itself in your writing? and how much of your fictional character is actually you? And Wendy, do you want to start that off?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about two of my main characters. You touched on Megan. She is a former environmental attorney. I indeed am an attorney. But I think that's where the obvious similarities kind of stop. I agree. I think you're always drawing on your own experiences as a writer, whether that be things like education or career or traits, right? Or things that you see around you. I think for most of us, we would say we never take anything whole cloth, but it might be a feeling, an experience, an observation, or a series of them that come through in the writing. And so for my Allison Campbell series, Allison, as I mentioned, is almost a psychologist. Before I went to law school, I have a master's in psychology, and I worked with kids who were dually diagnosed. They were both dependent, and most of them were part of the juvenile justice system. And when I left there and I went to law school on the Villanova main line, on the Philadelphia main line in Villanova, I was really kind of struck by the juxtaposition of these two careers, kind of working with these kids who had everything stacked against them, and then coming to this place where, frankly, I met a lot of people who had everything stacked in their favor. And that's how Allison was born, because I just really drew on that prior experience working with these kids. And again, nothing was whole cloth. It was more just my life experiences sort of being filtered through this book series. And so for Megan, my husband and I tried to start an organic farm in the Philadelphia area. And after a lot of toil digging rocks out of soil, and a very long story that I won't go into now, it was the kibosh was put on it by somebody in the zoning office for a reason that felt very political. And there is absolutely no basis in that for the fact that the very first victim in that series was a zoning person from the town of Winston. Do not draw any conclusions. But in all seriousness, we were able to take that farm that never was and I recreated it in the fictional world of Winston. So I do think fiction is a great and very cathartic way of kind of working through some of what you go through in life and your own personal experiences. But I think that it's very much filtered and relayed into a fictional world, which gives it, I hope, authenticity.
Okay. And Colonel Don Helin, can you tell us about Colonel Zac Kelly and how he came to be and your impact on him?
Yeah, I think there's some there. I always like to think that Zac is a glamourized Don Helin, but basically, when I came in the service, I was at a bunch of different posts. Fort Carson. I was with divisions, so I got to know the Army system. And during the time that I was, going to these different divisions, I had 3 tours in the Pentagon. And each of those tours was about 3 years. This gave me a lot of information. You kind of saw it all. And you think about weapon systems. Yes, I understand that. I understand the Rangers and Special Forces, but there's a political piece. The Army can be incredibly political. But I think the thing that helped me a lot was, between the time I left the Army and started writing novels, I spent almost 7 years as a travel writer. And I learned to kind of try to capture the scene. And when Dick was talking about New York, that reminded me that one of my novels, Long Walk Home, was set in New York. And and I found that Zac and his friend go in to eat at a restaurant on 44th Street. So you've got to make sure there's a restaurant on 44th Street. I mean, I think setting, I have found that readers will go with your imagination if they find the setting is straightforward and good. And I think that is an important piece of the experience. So it's not just my time in the military. It's the fact, I was International Thriller Writers member and for about 8 years, I went to New York every summer. So I can place things in New York that I wouldn't have been able to do very well. And the same thing with Vietnam, the same thing with Tibet. So I think that's what's helped me a lot, to kind of pay attention to what's going on about me and take notes so I can talk about them later on. I just take notes on different places that I've been, and I just put them in a file, and you never know when you're going to use them. And I'm sure Dick has found the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can't imagine, the way they present New York City journalists on TV and in the movies, how hectic and frantic and exciting that life must be. Is it really that way?
Well, it's interesting because I said, I do tend to write what I know. And one of the advantages of doing that is, nobody can, I mean, people can come to me and say, oh, this is a horrible story, or didn't like your book, or I didn't like your character. But if somebody comes to me and they say, well, that's not what happens, that's not true about the journalism, I can always say, yes, it is, because I feel I have the credentials. I don't have to research it or anything. And so it gives you a step up when you're able to write about what you know, the way Wendy does, and Don and myself. But I'd just like to qualify this, because it's not quite as simple, as it seems. I've had people, reviewers and stuff, in a nice way say to me, like, wow, Belsky, he gives us a totally authentic look at what is inside a New York City newsroom, And the truth of the matter is, it isn't authentic. It's not true, because if you were going to get a true look of a New York City newsroom, you probably wouldn't read past page 10, because jobs in newsrooms, like any job you have, can have boring days. I mean, you can be sitting there waiting to eat lunch. You can be doing some boring story that you don't care about. An old friend of mine, Bill Thomas, I see in the audience here, who's also an old journalist, and I'm sure he can also, confirm that not every day, you don't break Watergate every day you go into the newsroom. Having said that, it is a lot of fun. But it's fictional. You're putting a lot of stuff together, and the story, and I think every writer does that, every successful writer, hopefully. The story I always remember, and I love to tell, and I may have told this story in one of my other appearances, Deb, at the bookstore, but I always thought it was classic. It was Raymond Chandler was criticized once for Philip Marlowe. A reviewer said, this is ridiculous. Philip Marlowe, the detectives don't do this. They don't get knocked on the head every time they walk into a room. They don't get beautiful blonde clients crossing their legs in front of their thing. It's totally unrealistic. And Chandler responded, you're absolutely right. It is totally unrealistic. But if I wrote about what a detective PI did all day, no one would ever read me. And I think we all do that, whether it be a lawyer or a military. You're putting together stuff. You're putting together the most interesting stuff. But at the same time, you're embellishing it. You're putting in fiction. My character talks back to everybody. If her boss tells her to do something, she's like, "Oh, I don't care what you do. I'm going to do what I want." And she's noble. Most of them would be fired, So a lot of it is kind of like, hey, this would be fun to be this person. And as a fiction writer, you can put that. I interviewed, I think of something like, Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David. He does all this obnoxious stuff that we kind of wish privately that we could say this, but none of us ever would. And Ace Atkins, who I interviewed about a year ago, who writes the Spencer series now, was talking about, he interviewed once Robert Parker, who was the original, obviously created Spencer. And if you've read Spencer, he's the wisecracking guy that, that just says anything to everybody. And Parker said, basically, the Spencer character says the things at the moment that all the rest of us wish later. Oh, I wish I would have said that. Well, he says them at the time. So that's kind of what I try and do when I set the tone for a New York City media newsroom. So it is fun. It is exciting. But I do embellish quite a bit.
Okay, that's very interesting. The pandemic, whether we like it or not, the pandemic is now an integral part of our history. And, 100 years from now, they're going to look back on this time, just like we look back when the Spanish influenza And, I think we're actually going to be taking this further, it's going to be years down the road probably till all this is resolved. So it's impacted everyone, and it's starting to creep into our culture as well. I just listened to the audiobook, the latest Harry Bosch audiobook by Michael Connolly.
Yeah.
And the author incorporated the pandemic in his story. Harry Bosch is wearing a mask now. He knows people that have had COVID. And the author did a great job incorporating that into the story it felt very authentic because it's part of our lives now.
Well, I would just like to, if I could just jump in real quickly, and
Sure.
then I don't, but and disagree with you there, because I just read the book too. I think it's called The Darkest Hour or something. The new Michael Connelly, and I am the world's biggest Michael Connelly fan. I've read every book he's ever, like 40 some books, and as usual, it's a really good book. I had a real problem with that, and I know a lot of other people did too, because I was talking about this on a few shows recently. If you go on Amazon, you'll see an awful lot of readers that were not happy that he spent so much time on, COVID. One of the problems is because COVID becomes dated so quickly. I mean, it's like he's starting just when the vaccine first came out. So a lot of what you're reading, but I don't know. It's just I think the majority of writers that I know have avoided COVID so far in their books. He didn't. And it isn't like he just talks about wearing masks. I mean, he dwells on it throughout that book. He dwells on vaccine, he dwells on masks. I don't know, it stopped me. And I look, it's subjective. You thought it was good, but and I liked the book, but that part I wished he hadn't done that. Not that I'm anybody to tell Michael Connelly what to do.
Well, yeah, I guess we all have our opinions on that. And I was just wondering, though, we've had to adjust the way we do things in real life. For example, we're presenting this event virtually by Zoom. And I was just wondering, what ways has the pandemic impacted you as authors? Have you resumed doing any live book signings? Are you writing more because you spend more time in isolation? Do you have plans to incorporate the pandemic into your writing and your future stories? And it can be some fun stuff too. Your future characters could be fighting over toilet paper, stuff like that. So why don't we switch things up, Dick? Since you started, do you want to address that a little bit more? What your plans are, or how you're dealing with it right now?
Sure, and there's two parts to this. Obviously, there's the writing and then there's the promotion. In terms of the writing, COVID has been hard. It's, people say what you said, oh, you have a lot more time to write. Well, I've been writing, all through COVID, just, I have 3 books out this year, but it's more difficult for me because I am the kind of writer who writes, I need to be around people to be inspired. So when I normally write, I go to coffee shops, I go to the writer's room in New York City, or I've written on subways, I've written on the beach. I tend to like to be out among people when I write. That's kind of, the one thing I try and avoid is sitting in my house or my apartment and writing. But obviously during COVID, I'm forced to do that. So it didn't make the writing easier, it made it harder. A few writers have started doing a few in-person things. I know a lot of people, including myself. I have not done anything in person since COVID started. And obviously I miss that. I miss the contact with people. I miss coming out to your place, Deb, and meeting people and having them talk about your book face to face. And I hope to do that again. But I think a lot of us have discovered there's tremendous advantages in doing what we're doing. I mean, just even now, if we were going to do this in person, then I would have to spend the day driving 2 hours or whatever from New York to Mechanicsburg near Harrisburg, which I would have done, which I've done in the past. But I recently did an event, on a show in Oregon, and I wasn't going to go to Oregon, but I was able to do a Zoom. And when you do so the one example I use is whenever I've had Claire Carlson books come out in the past few years, I've done a book party at Mysterious Books in New York, which is, the last legendary New York mystery bookstore. And normally at these things, I'll get maybe about 75 people because you have a lot of media friends and that's a good crowd and you'll sell 40 or 50 books. That's nice, But with COVID, like when it started in 2019, I couldn't do that. And they said, well, let's try and do a digital one. And we did a Zoom like kind of deal like this. I had 350 people at it because I suddenly had all these people from California and Michigan and Texas, and everybody could do it. And so would I love to go back to in-person stuff? Yes, it would be great. But I do think what we're doing now has shown a lot of people that there are other ways you can do this. And in some ways they can be a slight advantage.
So it's been a silver lining then to you.
I wouldn't say that because I don't want to say anything good about COVID, but I mean, it's like people have been able to live their lives and continue working and writing in, you know, in different ways. I think the biggest thing for a lot of us is the conferences. I've made so many friends by going to the big conferences, you know, I mean, smaller ones too, like you've had them out there, Deb, but I mean, I'm going to Killer Nashville and BoucherCon and Thriller Fest and all these people. And, you know, we haven't been able to do that in 2 years, and nobody still really knows if we're going to do it in 2022. I mean, I've enrolled in them all, but bottom line is a lot of changes. I think most of us are just trying to deal with it in whatever way is best.
Okay. Don, how about you? How has COVID affected you and your writing?
Well, Elaine and I have really been in lockdown here because right now, sadly, central Pennsylvania is having an incredible amount of problems. So that's given me the ability during this time. I finished Missing and have almost finished another book. But more importantly, I think what that's done is that my publisher and I began to talk about the pandemic and memoirs, because I had, you know, I'm in an over 55 community and people's stories are incredible. So I started teaching memoir, and that gave my publisher and I the idea that maybe we ought to put out a call for memoirs on what has your life been like during the pandemic. And we got over 100 memoirs, and we picked 32, and we put, which has turned out to be a bestseller, it's Voices from the Pandemic. And it has 32 memoirs on, it was teachers, writers, singers, healthcare people, some blood-curdling stories there. But you know, one of the most fun section, we had 8 school students from 6th grade. And what has this meant to you? And it's incredibly interesting to watch what they have to say. And so in that case, and that got me interested enough in writing memoirs. So I finally wrote my own, you know, and that's turning into a pretty good story. So I think Dick makes an excellent point, is that it's a difficult, I know we did a Zoom on whether or not it's good to put the pandemic in. My own concern is that I think a lot of people are trying to get away from, they're trying to get away from their daily life, and they want to escape. Now, there are some ideas, and I just finished one with Daniel Silva, where he has somebody in a pandemic, in a mask, you know, and being careful and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing, the lockdown's just been very difficult on me. As many of you know, I have a lot of family in San Antonio that I haven't seen. As a matter of fact, I'm so happy that my daughter and granddaughter are on the Zoom this week, because I had so much fun. My granddaughter loved writing, and she invited me down to teach classes down there to her fellow students. And if you think working with teenagers or whatever and it is a piece of cake, you're out of your mind, you know. Plus, she was the one that helped title one of my books. So Suzanne was a lot of help. So the bottom line, I think that COVID has been a real problem for me, because I've missed several opportunities to go to wonderful programs. On the other hand, we've been doing a lot more Zooms. So I'm hoping there's supposed to be another big conference here in Philly in March. And I'm kind of hoping that this is going to be my coming out party, but I don't know if it's going to work or not. Right now, things don't look good.
Okay, Wendy, it's your turn. How has the pandemic affected you?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Don and Dick said. I mean, so I work full time and I work remotely for the most part, in addition to writing. And I would say there was a little bit of a, I don't want to call it mental health, but a little bit of an adjustment needed that first year in COVID. Personally, I had some trouble really getting the creative juices flowing. So I was working on 2 manuscripts at the time, and they definitely took me longer to write than I think under normal circumstances. Now, once that sort of came back, and I was able to kind of reconcile the fact that, you know, to Dick's point, I wasn't able to be around people. So I was working a day job that felt like it was never ending. And then to be able to kind of switch off and write, sitting in the same seat. And I live in Vermont, where it's, you know, it's beautiful and there's all sorts of opportunities to get outside, but nevertheless, it was very isolating. And so it took me a while to work through that, but I did. So I finished both manuscripts, which yay, was great. I also had a release come out in 2020 in July in the midst of the pandemic. And that was my first fully virtual release. So all of the in-person events were canceled, and, you know, conferences canceled. And, you know, I would agree. I mean, I wouldn't say it was great, but everybody managed. People were incredibly supportive, and I was very appreciative of that, despite, you know, what we were all going through. I will say one thing. I think one of my series is more of a cozy series, and I did see an increase in e-sales. And I think people, you know, to Don's point about maybe people trying to get away a little bit from the pandemic, you know, there was a certain amount of escapism. It was, you know, wherever you are politically it was tough. You know, COVID was tough. It was just been a tough couple of years. And so I did see readers really rally around that sort of mystery element, and which was really great. And I personally am steering clear of it for all the reasons said. I think, one, a lot of people are reminded on a daily basis, don't necessarily want to read about it. 2, it feels like it's going to be dated very quickly. And, you know, at some point, processing it in the future, perhaps it'll play a role in my writing, but for now, I'm steering clear of it pretty much altogether.
And if I could just add one more quick thing, Wendy, to what you're saying, and this came up a lot with the Michael Connelly book, it also adds a political element to your book, because this has become, for whatever reason, a political issue. You know, you're for it or against it because you're Trump or whatever. And it just complicates, to me, what we do as fiction, you know, to get into that. And that's why I'm in agreement with you. Like, I try to make it more escapist in my books.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Okay, thanks. Now we come to my favorite part of this presentation. I'm going to ask each of you to read an excerpt from your book, and you can take 5 to 10 minutes and try to get us excited about your book. And why don't you go first, Don, since you've been the middleman all along here.
Okay, well, again, thank you for this opportunity. And what I'm going to do is just read the opening of Missing. And again, this was published in 2020. On the drive-in from the airport in Minneapolis, Colonel Zac Kelly passed the house where he'd grown up, then around his old high school. He figured he should at least check out things before the reunion. Still looked the same, although much smaller than he remembered. Guess that was probably the case with a lot of schools. When he reached 36th Street, he turned left and headed over the lakes area. He had enjoyed all the lakes in Minneapolis, particularly Lake Harriet and Lake Calhoun. Maybe he decided to come back to Minneapolis because the reunion would be held at the Calhoun Beach Hotel. He remembered the proms, the party, the dances with Bonnie. He remembered that, and that swamped his memories. Would she be there? Oh man, he hoped so. Soon after parking his rental car, he found himself on the patio in front of the hotel. Muscle memory had led him there. A voice sounded behind him. Well, my goodness, Zac Kelly, is that really you? Startled, Zac turned to see a familiar face. It took a moment for him to come up with a name. Jean. Jean Edwards, it's great to see you again. You look terrific. She smiled up at him, sunglasses pushed back in her hair. That long black hair framed her face, and she looked great in her sleeveless cream-colored party dress, displaying her tanned shoulders. It's been a long time, Zac. Where have you been all these years? Let's see, after a year at the University of Minnesota, I had enough and dropped out. I went in the Army, and I've been there ever since. Well, you were a pretty eligible bachelor, if I remember right. Actually, Jean, I got a divorce about a year ago. He said, oh, what about you? Well, I married Freddie Tyson after college. Became Mrs. Tyson, although I never did use the Mrs. bit. I don't agree with that. Wheeler dealer Freddie Tyson. What in the world got you two together? I didn't think you two would connect at all. I didn't think so either, but you know, it's worked out okay. We've had a couple of kids and we're still hanging together. What's he doing these days? I always suspected he'd be successful. Yep, done well. Owns a chain of nursing homes. The largest one is right here south of Minneapolis in Richfield, not quite out to Interstate 44. Well, that seems like a good location, Jean. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Don't you work for some big deal weenie in DC? Zac had to laugh. I'm not sure Admiral Steele would like to be called a big deal weenie, but I guess he is. He's the president's national security advisor. Her eyes widened. Wow, what do you do? The admiral's put together a small group to help him cut through the bureaucracy. There's a lot of that crap in DC. Jean stopped and looked out at the water for a moment. I guess I'd like to talk to you about the nursing homes. I suspect with Freddie, they're hugely successful. She kept looking at the lake, then back at Zac. They are, but Zac heard a muffled pop. Knew the sound. Gun. And he called and pulled Jean to the ground, hit the ground and covered her with his body, then raised his head to look around. A few startled people looked over. Get down, he called. Get down. Gun. They hit the ground. A quick look at her wound told him all he needed to know. She had taken what must have been a high velocity round right in the forehead. Had died instantly. But he checked for a pulse. He just had to make sure. God damn, he muttered. He grabbed his cell and dialed 911.
Well, that's quite a cliffhanger that you got.
Thank you.
Okay. Wendy, you're next.
Don, I just want to say, I think you could read your own novels for audio.
Thank you.
That's good. All right, I'm going to read just the beginning of Bitter Harvest, which is the second book in my Greenhouse series. The harvest moon glowed right overhead, a burnt offering to the mind. The woods beyond Washington Acres felt inviting until nightfall. It was early October, the start of fall foliage season, and by day the leaves on the oaks, birch, and mountain ash shone bright in a rainbow of reds, golds, and deep oranges. But once darkness hit, the ghosts emerged, or so it seemed. Halloween was just a few weeks away, and the pace on the farm had finally lulled to a more comfortable frenzy. Most of the summer crops had been picked and sold, and what was left had been canned, frozen, stored, or donated. The fields were being turned over and planted with cover crops like clover and daikon radish. The fall bounty was just coming in, and Megan had enough pumpkins to supply a dozen fall festivals. Autumn had been kinder than the previous spring, and the October air was cool but not cold, dry but not arid. The farm's coffers too were full, well, at least not empty. Megan should have felt content, pleased even. Then why this feeling of unrest? Megan opened the door to the porch and stepped outside into the chilly night. Overhead, the stars were eclipsed by the reddish, eerie moon. Gunther and Sadie, her two dogs, ran out behind her. Gunther, a Polish Tatra sheepdog, took off for his nightly rounds, checking on the chickens and goats and monitoring the perimeter of the farm, just as Megan and Dr. Finn had trained him to do. Sadie stayed pressed to her side. Megan reached down to pat Sadie, taking comfort from the dog's warm presence, but she couldn't shake the image of the chair. Oh, she knew very well that it was just a chair, a battered red Adirondack, the kind you see in homes all across the United States. Nothing scary about that, except that this wasn't parked on a patio or beside a pool in some suburban lot. It sat alone at the top of Potter Hill in the woods, the same thick woods that bordered her property. Megan had hiked up there yesterday, seduced by blue skies and the allure of those fiery leaves. Out of breath, with Sadie beside her and Gunther running up ahead, she reached the top of Potter Hill and spied the chair. Her first thought was one of gratitude, how nice it was to have somewhere to sit after a grueling climb. But after she lowered herself into the chair, she realized it was oddly positioned. It didn't take advantage of the sweeping view of the valley below or the red-hewn tree line in the distance. It did, however, have a clear view of her house. Megan had hopped out of the seat, still thinking it was purely a coincidence. Whoever had placed the chair there had done so on a whim, and they probably paid no attention to how it was situated. But when she stood and examined the spot, she realized she was wrong. The ground under the chair's legs had divots where the base had worn into the dirt, and the grass and foliage near the foot area, thick elsewhere, had been trampled from frequent traffic. Where Megan's feet had rested, the earth was worn bare. Spooked, she had called the dogs and raced back to the house. In the comfort of her kitchen, she decided she was overreacting. So what if someone had been sitting alone on Potter Hill? So what if their chair faced this property? What could they possibly see from far away? But now, as she stared into the dark woods under the glow of the autumn moon, Megan realized her earlier angst had been quite warranted. With a good set of binoculars, someone could see quite a bit from that spot, like her comings and goings, and the times she and Bibi were alone.
You know, I'm always drawn to stories that have animals in them. So when you started talking about Gunther, it immediately got my attention. And that sounds really cool.
Thank you.
Okay, Dick, you're next.
Well, I mean, I'm going to do the beginning too, because obviously that's the best way to, it's kind of hard to pick up from the middle of a book. So this is the opening for Beyond the Headlines with Claire Carlson. Opening credits, the rules, according to Claire. Death is a funny business sometimes, especially in big city newsrooms where I've worked most of my life. I remember one of them where we all loved to play a game called Somebody Famous Died. The idea was to fantasize about celebrities dying and try to come up with the ones that would be the biggest stories we could put on the air or on the front page. Like, say, Kim Kardashian in bed, making a sex tape with a man who wasn't Kanye West, or Justin Bieber, who had 64 tattoos the last time it was counted, dying from an infected needle while getting a tattoo of Selena Gomez removed for a new one of Haley Baldwin. Or Oprah Winfrey. This was back when she was the biggest thing on TV, both figuratively and literally, choking to death on a ham sandwich. Just like Mama Cass, said the guy who came up with that one. I think he won the game in our newsroom that day. It's impossible to work in a newsroom and not hear a lot of gallows humor about death. I think we joke about death because we have to deal with so much of it as journalists. Murders, plane crashes, sicknesses, and all the other things that make up the TV newscasts and newspapers and news websites every day. I think death helps us put a distance between ourselves and the reality of the death or death's recovery. Most of the time it works, but not always. Because death remains the biggest mystery for all of us. No one really understands it. And so we do our best to avoid taking it seriously for much of our lives until one day it comes knocking at our own door. And then it's no longer a laughing matter. Chapter 1. Do you know who Laurie Bateman is? My friend Janet Wood asked me. I do, I said. I also know who Lady Gaga is, and Angelina Jolie, and Ivanka Trump. I'm in the media, remember? That's what we do in the media. We cover famous people. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Laurie Bateman hired me. As an attorney? Yes, as an attorney. That's what I do, Claire. We were sitting in my office at Channel 10 News, the TV station in New York City where I work as news director. I should have known something was going on as soon as Janet showed up. We usually met at Janet's law office, which is big with panoramic views of Midtown Manhattan and a lot nicer office than mine. Janet never comes to see me at Channel 10 unless she has a reason. I figured I was about to find out that reason. It was early December and outside it was snowing, the first real storm of the winter. The snow started falling during the night, and by now it was covering the city with a powdery white blanket. Pretty soon the car exhausts and trucks would turn into brown slush, but for now it was pretty gorgeous. From the window next to my desk, the city had an eerie, almost unreal quality to it, like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Why does Laurie Bateman need you as an attorney? I asked Janet. She hesitated for what seemed to be an inordinately long amount of time before answering. Are we talking off the record here? Whatever you want, Janet. I need your word on that. Come on, it's me, Claire Carlson, your best friend in the world. She nodded. Laurie Bateman wants me to represent her in divorce proceedings. Wow, I thought you'd like that. Is it too late to take back my best friend in the world off the record promise? Janet smiled. How much do you know about Laurie Bateman, she asked me. Well, I knew about as much as the rest of the world. Laurie Bateman seemed to have the American dream going for her. She'd come to the US as a baby with her family after the fall of Saigon in 1975. And the pretty Vietnamese girl had grown up to become a top model, a successful actress, and finally the wife of one of the country's top corporate deal makers. She had a fancy Manhattan townhouse, a limousine at her beck and call, and her face had graced the covers of magazines like Vogue and People. Her husband was Charles Hollister, who had become incredibly wealthy back in the 70s as one of the pioneers of the burgeoning computer age. He was a kind of Steve Jobs of those early days, and he later expanded into all sorts of other industries, from media to pharmaceuticals to oil drilling and more. He was listed as one of the 10 wealthiest businessmen in America. When Hollister married Laurie Bateman a few years ago, there were a lot of jokes about the big difference in age between the two. She was so much younger and beautiful, like the jokes people make about Rupert Murdoch with Wendy Dang and then Jerry Hall, Murdoch's last two wives. People always assume that a young and pretty woman like that is marrying for the money. But Laurie Bateman and Charles Hollister insisted they were in love, and they had consistently projected the public persona of a happily married couple in the media since their wedding. Except it now appears they weren't so happily married. Is she trying to divorce him to get her hands on his money? I asked. Sorry. Actually, he's trying to divorce her and stop her from getting her hands on any of his money. So the bottom line here is this divorce is about money. Always is. Isn't there a prenup agreement that would settle all this? Yes and no. Spoken like a true lawyer. Well, there is a prenup, but we don't think it applies here. That's because there's other factors in the marriage which could invalidate the prenup. Okay. I waited. Such as, I asked finally? Well, for one thing, Charles Hollister has a mistress, a much younger woman he's been seeing. Younger than Laurie Bateman? Much younger, in her 20s. Geez, Hollister's such an old man. I imagine him even having trouble having sex with his wife, which having a second woman on the side. Well, her discovery that he was cheating on her, along with a lot of other reasons, have turned Laurie Bateman's life into a nightmare, a living hell behind the walls of the beautiful homes they live in. She's kept quiet about it so far, projecting the happy couple image they put on for the media. But now she wants the world to know the truth. That's where you come in, Claire. Aha, I thought to myself. Now we're getting down to it. I was about to find out the real reason Janet was here. Laurie Bateman wants to go public with all this, Janet said. She wants to tell her story in the media, the true story of her marriage to Charles Hollister. We know Hollister is going to use his clout to try and smear her and make her look bad. So that's why we want to get this version out quickly. What I'm talking about here is an exclusive interview with Laurie Bateman about all of this. Her talking about the divorce, the cheating, everything. And she wants you to do the interview with her. Okay. Can I meet her? I asked Janet.
Oh, Dick, you cut out there for the last two or three
Yeah,
seconds.
you froze. Oh, yeah. Where did it end with?
Just like
anyway,
the last 30 seconds, maybe that was it.
well, anyway, the bottom line was, yeah, I suddenly realized you had frozen. The bottom line was her friend, Claire's friend, tells her that Laurie Bateman wants to do this interview, give an exclusive interview to Claire where she's going to tell all this scandal involving her husband. And Claire is like, wow, great, bring it on. So that's the setup for the rest of the book.
Well, I hope they weren't coming for me, all those sirens I heard in the background.
Yeah, I live on the same street as a firehouse down there, and I've done whenever I've done interviews in the past, people say, "Are you being arrested? You know what's going on?" Not at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, but we might have time for a question or two. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask anything of our panelists? I guess you can type it in your message box, or you can unmute and just shout out. Doesn't look like we're getting anybody. Deb, do you have any last words you want to say?
Sure. You know me, I always have to have the last word. I want to thank the authors. I want to thank Dennis, and I want to thank all of you for attending today. This has been a lot of fun, and you could have spent your time watching football or doing just about any other thing. Yes, Dick, I know you want to get back to your football game. I'm only teasing you.
There's a lot more football today, Deb. It goes on till.
Oh, well, then
midnight,
it
but
doesn't
yeah,
matter. This is only
yeah.
about an hour out, but that's good. But
I'll be back on. I'll be back on NFL Red Zone as soon as we get off here. You know.
Oh, okay. Speaking of events live, I'll be glad when we can get back to them too. I love the authors are so willing to do these Zoom events with us, even though we cut out a little now and then. You got that wind out there. I don't know what that's all about today, but and it could be on anybody's end. Like Wendy said, she had no power for a while. We weren't sure she was going to join us today, but I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to do some events maybe by midsummer next year. I don't know. The authors who had signed up for our conference 2019 before the pandemic, most of them are willing to try it again this coming August if we do it, but no promises. The authors' books from today are all on sale on our internet. Don's books, memoirs, and Don's, what's the one with the memories, the name of that book?
It's Voices from the Pandemic.
Voices from the Pandemic, and his memoir. We do have those at the shop also. So what you have to do is probably email those. I don't think we actually have those up on the website yet. But we've got Don's other books. We've got Wendy's books. We've got Dick's books on the website. And we're more than happy. You can even call us. You don't have to go on the website and order them. You can come into the shop and get them too. So without further ado, I want to wish you all a great Sunday, and thank you again for joining us. And we hope you'll join us for the next event, whenever that one's going to be happening. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Debbie, and thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you all.